We're talking about data analysis today, and this is the responses that we got from everybody about Google Forms. Pretty even, some people use them a lot, things like that. Some people not sure about accessing sheets, which is what we will be coming on to, so that's fine. That's a good spread there. In terms of their opinion of Google Sheets, we've got some fans there, finding it really useful. And similarly with Excel, so some people are reluctant Excel users, some people use it quite a bit, and hopefully you'll be able to see how similar Google Sheets is, if not better in some cases. These are the responses in terms of how often people have used various things. We're going to talk about view options. We're going to get sorting and filtering very briefly, because most people seem quite happy about that there. Conditional formatting is useful. That explore tool is something that Excel doesn't have. We'll come back to. Pivot tables I'm going to leave till last, as Margaret and Paula will know. It's not an easy thing to try and get across from business studies. And formula, we'll touch on that, but not in the same degree that scientists would like to. Graphs and charts, protecting areas, and data validation we'll touch on as well there. What we are going to go through is going to take the example of the mark sheet to start off with from Google Classroom, and just talk through some of what some of you will find is pretty much basics of spreadsheets. Some of you this might be news to. Then going to take a spreadsheet coming from a Google form and how that can be accessed, and then come on to some more intricate things like the Explore tool, which is fantastic, and then pivot tables if you want more than Explore can do for you. And then hopefully the last 10 minutes just talk through some of the ways that spreadsheets can be used. And there's certainly some schools are starting to use Google Sheets much more for admin, because they're widely editable across a staff group. So that is the plan. So the way that, if you haven't used spreadsheets before so much, it's unlikely you're going to make your own spreadsheet. You're going to probably start with something which is, for instance, I'm using a test class because I don't want to use people's names. So that's the way that you can see marks in Google Classroom. It's not particularly brilliant. You can't do anything with that data. But if you go back to one of the classwork assignments and click on the settings wheel, whoops, let's go back a stage. If you click on one of the assignments, and when you've got an assignment up, then if you click on the settings cog for that assignment, you can then copy all the marks to a Google Sheet, and that will open up, it'll open up this kind of format of Google Sheet here. So I've only got one test pupil in here, and the lazy so-and-so has only done half the assignments. But that's the kind of format. You've got each of your assignments set out by date, and there's the maximum mark, assuming that you give marks for each of your assignments, and then it calculates a class average. So what I've done is I've added to that basic spreadsheet with some fictitious names that some of you might recognize as Scottish scientists. And that would normally have the email address and the percentage of things that they've been submitting in there as well. So first thing is, you can see that at the moment, if I want to go backwards and forwards across the spreadsheet, it conveniently keeps the names over here, and similarly if I run up and down, it keeps the headings up here. However, there's more there than I really want, so I'm going to go into the view option and freeze not the whole columns, but just those first two columns, just the surname and the forename. And so now the move backwards and forwards is just holding those two there. And I could do the same thing for the rows as well. So that view option of being able to freeze rows and columns isn't on by default. So you might need to do that, especially if somebody sends you a spreadsheet where you've got loads and loads of data and you keep missing the names or missing the headers if they haven't been frozen. So Fiona, I'm surprised your girls haven't come through and says, is he talking about frozen? So I love playing to an audience that's got the microphone switched off. It's like
they're currently just arguing over blankets and who likes Elsa the most, so I'm trying to ignore them.
Okay, that's fine. So that's the first option. The next thing is in terms of getting just the data that you want. Say if we wanted to know everybody who's got a particular name in this list, you can then go and either going to use filtering. So if you click across the top there and go into data and filter, create a filter, then you see the sort of 3 lines going in like a downwards arrow. That then allows you to create a filter where you can, at the moment it's got everybody selected, we can clear that so there's nobody, and then we only select the people who've got Daniel. And I've lost my, and then click on that to say okay, and then it just shows anybody called Daniel in the list there. So that's filtering. The other thing we can do is, if we get rid of that filter, so now we're back to the whole thing there. Say if we wanted to, at the moment they're all sorted by first names. So if we wanted them sorted by second names, there's 2 ways you can do it. If you've only got a single header, you could use a sorting from the filter, but because I've got multiple rows there, then I'm just going to highlight all my data and then go into data and sort that range. And this time I'm going to sort by column A, and I'm going to go A to Z on column A, and it's now sorted them all by surname and then forename. So by default, Google Classroom's marks lists come out sorted by surname in any case. Another thing that you can do is maybe if you want to pick out on this, I'm just going to change this. We're not seeing an awful lot. That's better. So we're not seeing an awful lot of the data here. So maybe I want to know people who are doing particularly well or particularly poorly in the class. This exoplanets assignment had a maximum mark of 40. Maybe I want to know who got at least 30 out of 40 for that assignment. So if I highlight all the data, then I use something called conditional formatting. So you go in through the format, conditional formatting, and then you get a menu over here that says it's applying to all that column there. And I want to say that if the number is greater than or equal to 30, then they'll show up as green. And that instantly shows who all your sort of star performers are, just using that conditional formatting. And you can do that across the others there. You can, but it takes a little bit more doing, make it reflect what your total mark is, so you don't have to do the division there. So we'll get rid of that one just for a moment. And the other thing you can do with that data there is, instead of having a single color, put in a color scale. This is really nice because you can have the minimum value is those kids who you're really worried about. We're going to traffic light them red. You can have a midpoint of, maybe it would be 25 out of 40, and they're going to be sort of amber. And then the maximum value we're going to say is green because they're good to go, because they seem to be doing all right. Put that in, and then we've got this traffic lighted there now. So it gives you a really quick view, especially as a PT who is really struggling in somebody's class, if the marks sheet is color-coded in that way. So that's using color scales. So I'm just going to pause there for breath. Any questions or anything that anybody wants to add so far?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yeah, Dave.
What's the percentage in that column D? It's sort of greyed out. It says 67.02 on yours.
Yeah, I think that's the submissions. So that won't be working on this because I've put in Duff data, I've just put in test data here. But I think
I've opened up one of my classes on that,
mm-hmm.
and at the top in the class average it says 76.07, and then when I look at individual kids, there's numbers that are greater than 100%.
Don't know is the perfect
Okay.
answer. I really don't know. I'm looking. I think the thing would be to go back to the formula, because there is a percentage calculation there, but it's looking pretty complicated to me at the moment. So I'd need to come back to you on that.
Okay, I just don't understand what the statistic is. That was all.
Yeah. No, I don't know. Don't know.
Okay.
Again, it might be
fine.
worth googling it. There'll be something on the Google Classroom help pages that will tell you. Hopefully, or maybe just somebody made up something. I don't know. Maybe it has no statistical significance whatsoever. The other thing that you could do with these results is say, well, I wonder what the mark spread is for this. And so if you highlight a whole heap of marks there, and then if we put in there an insert and a chart, one thing that's super easy to do in Sheets as opposed to Excel is a histogram. So if you go down to histogram chart, and it actually gives you that mark spread there, going from 20 up to 55. There shouldn't be a 55 in there, but no. Okay, why is that not working? Anyway, that's the way you do it. And the main thing that you might need to do with that is you can change with your histogram options the bin size. Let's just go back a stage. That doesn't seem to be doing. There should be the bucket size there. You might want to have it just by every 2 marks, and show what the bucket size is for your histogram. So that's a histogram. The other thing you might want to do is to show a trend in the percentages that you've got going across the class to see how well the class is doing. So for that, let's have a look at how we do some calculations on Sheets. So these are all marks out of whatever here. And the class average, if we look up at this bit here, it says equals, there's an if error just to stop it not displaying anything if there's an error in the calculation. So don't worry about that. But what you could do is just type in, I'll start from scratch here. So if we want to say, so if I want the average of all these marks to appear in there, you click on the cell that you want to put the calculation into, do equals, and we're wanting to do average. And it actually suggests, and this is one of the nice things, because Google Sheets has got this artificial intelligence built in, that it actually suggests what to do based on the data that you've got. It can tell that I've got data from cell E6 to E25. So let's just go with that. And that gives me the average of all those results. It's giving it to the nearest single decimal place. That's really a bit too accurate for me. I prefer as an engineer just to take one down there, so you can decrease the number of decimal places using that little option there, just so I've got 31%. So that's now my average of all those marks. And I think, well, that's really good. I'd like to do that across the board. So what you can do is if you grab the bottom corner and you're seeing that the cursor just turns into a cross. So there's the cursor normally. If I want to move it, it turns into a hand. But if I want to replicate it, it turns into a cross. And I'll drag that across all my cells like that. And it's now doing that same calculation, this time for column F. It's doing the same calculation, this time for column G. So it speeds up putting in formulas. So if you haven't used formulas before, that's just the basics of it, but there's many others you can do. Maybe we do want a percentage of our marks here. So let's just say we're going to say in there that we want to calculate a percentage. So it's going to be equals. Now it's the average number. So I click on that and it comes up with cell E5 divided by the maximum mark, that cell there. So I click on that and it's picked up that that's E3. Return. That's giving me text in white, so that's why it's not appearing, because it was a black background. So I'll leave it as a black background. There we go. So 78%. So it's already converted that to a percentage because it's using the percentage view there. And again, I can just pull that across like that there. Now, maybe we're interested in seeing how well the class is doing in terms of its average marks over time. So again, you can highlight all those percentages across time, put in a chart, and that's giving us a bar chart there, and that's showing the average mark as we go through the year as a percentage as opposed to totals. So the main thing is it depends how you want to analyze your class's data, but there's usually a way to do it. In Google Sheets, if you want to do anything with your charts, it's always on this Customize tab, and you just go through and take each of these options. It's a very different interface to Excel if you're used to using charts in Excel. The last couple of things I want to do before going on to Google Forms is just about protecting cells and things like that, so we'll get rid of that. So say if you're, as a principal teacher, you've set this, you don't want anybody to mess around with all your totals and all those part. Your colleagues are allowed to put in people's names, but if I want to protect that range there, it's very easy in Sheets to do that. You go into Format. No, hang on, I've lost this now.
Is it View?
No, protected ranges. Yeah, that's where you can see what's protected, but
I think it's in data. If you go down to data, protected ranges.
That's it. Thank you. It's just right down at the bottom there. So protected ranges in Sheets, then that's the area that I've already selected. So we could just say this is just not to be messed around with. And so there's various permissions that you can put in there. You can just say that it's only you that can do it. So you take everybody else out of the editing, anybody, if it's a shared sheet, or you can just show a warning to say that that's not to be. And so anybody else who is then clicking on that it would come up with an area. It would come up with an error saying, no, you're not supposed to change any of these. So that's just that one there. And the last one is if you're doing a mark sheet where people are putting in the marks by hand rather than coming straight from Google Classroom, it might be that the marks that you want to give them an error if they put in marks that are greater than the total. So I'm going to take that there and put into data validation. I'm going to say that for that there, then the criteria is that the number has to be less than or equal to the total, which for that one was 40. And then it shows a warning. So let's do that there. And let's just give this guy, sorry, give good old Victoria Drummond 50 there, and it comes up with an error. And there's a little marker there to say that that is the wrong mark that I've just put in there. What you may want to do is reference to that cell there, and I'll just do this very quickly because it's pretty niche. So let's just go through. Again. Oh gosh, I've lost it again. Always data validation. There we go. So you could say that is if you want to make it equal to that cell, which was cell F3. So it's equal to cell F3 is the one that you want there. And because that goes down the way, sometimes you've got to put in a dollar symbol to say that even if you go down the column, it's always the third row that we're talking about there. So sometimes you need to do that. So let's try that now with a rejected input. So I now put in 60 marks out of 50, and it comes up with an error, and it's saying that you're not allowed to do that. Okay, right. Pause that. I'll just stop sharing and see if there's any more. If anybody's got anything that they want to either say that they've done with spreadsheets or questions from what I've just gone through there.
It was just a quick thing on the data validation. We've got like an attendance spreadsheet that we look to protect from like other faculties. We've got like a whole school because we've got quite a small school. So we have a tab for each year group, and we're popping in like someone's worked some absolute wizardry and has managed to get all of the subjects listed that they don't attend, so it just comes up in an
Mhm.
but in terms of like the validation, if you want, you can copy. So if you want, like my faculty, I protect like my subjects so that only my faculty can edit them. You can copy that across to other tabs, and you can get like the ranges. You can just get the permissions copied across as a wee option. Obviously, like I would show you, but my spreadsheet's obviously got all my kids' names and stuff like that on it.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with some of these things. Yeah.
It's got, you've got an option that you can copy, so you don't have to set the permissions every time. You can just copy the permissions over, and it's really useful because we've got obviously like a spreadsheet for S2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we've got like the work engagement and the attendance. So it's just quite useful, a quick way of doing.
That sounds excellent. But it's amazing, and I think that's one of the things that schools are finding, that you can actually, it's a lot more flexible in Excel. You know, all your staff can access the one file, but in different ways. So that's brilliant. Anything else? Because I mean,
I've done a lot of color coding and stuff like that. Fiona will know that I absolutely love a color coded anything. But I, for all my different vocab tests and things like that, I just put all the different cells in that way. And same for when we're doing a different sort of achievements through, like, have you put all these like benchmarks? That's what the word was gone in English anyway. Like different benchmarks, I can just color code it straight away by just pressing a letter. So for example, I use A, B, C, or D, even with BGE, and it just goes in really quickly and color codes it. So it's really obvious who's meeting their targets on different parts of it, the course. And you can see where the improvement is as well, by filtering to see, like from the first unit in first year, how are they doing by the time they've got to the end of S2.
Tremendous. Yeah, so it's just making the most of our data. And I know that in any normal time in education, we're being constantly asked about data in terms of evidence of attainment and things like that. It's certainly a way to allow us to answer questions that people are asking. Okay. Anybody else? Little snippets or hints and tips with Google Sheets?
One of the things that we've been doing is putting comments on. So in my department, I can go in and see, just it's been quite useful for the classes, each of the members of staff can go in, and when we've resolved it, we can just get rid of them. So that's been quite good to keep a wee check on things, you know, so that's one of the things we've added as we've gone in.
What I'll do, Margaret, instead of you having to dig out something that's got, I'll just show everybody with this here. So yeah, it would be just a case of, like you say, insert and comment, same shortcut, and you just say what's going on here or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. And then I've been able to go in and kind of either resolve things if I've caught up with that student, or just put a response into the member of staff, what's happened with that student. So it's been quite handy for that.
Yeah, so just flags up with a little thing there, and then you can go back to it, and yeah, that's great. Okay then. Right, what I'm going to move on to is the sort of spreadsheets that you get from Google Forms. So I've shown you the kind of the summary that we get from the Google Forms that, you know, when you've done your pre-session questionnaire, which is fine. It's a good start, but it doesn't really allow you an awful lot of flexibility. So I'm going to show you, this was a form that we gave out last year for the whole school. So we've got 778, which isn't the full response, but it's certainly not bad. And we just asked how they're getting on with the Chromebooks and using G Suite for all year groups, and which apps they'd used, which had been difficult. So, you know, just a typical evaluation. I think the key thing when you're doing evaluations is to try and use multiple choice as much as possible. As soon as you give free text, if you've got more than a dozen people, you're left with too much data to try and analyze. So what we did was we kept it fairly multiple choice based. So we had, and the sort of thing you get in the responses for Google Docs is quite handy. You can just copy paste just using the copy and then paste it into a document or into a PowerPoint or into slides like I did just there. But the power comes when you just click on that view responses in sheets. And if we click on that, that takes you to a linked form. So it's you can see that there's a little purple thing next to form responses. That means that this will still, if somebody was to keep submitting responses to that Google form, they would just get added to the bottom of this with a new timestamp. So I've hidden the email addresses, and so the first thing to do is to think, well, there's a lot of data there. What you can do is to get an overview, you can just move the width of the columns. If you highlight all the columns that you're interested in, you can just change all the columns at once to the width there. There's various options in terms of whether you wrap or put the text up vertically, text rotation, just to make it easier to see what you've got on one screen. So play around with those formatting options there. But if we go into this first couple of things here, so in terms of what year group were you in and approximately how many periods did you use your Chromebook at some point in the lesson? So column C is what year group, column D, how many times did you use your Chromebook? I'm going to highlight both of those and then click on this little plus button down here, Open Explore. So when I go into Explore, the artificial intelligence of the Google people then comes up with all sorts of possible questions. It looks at the data and says, oh, well, what do you want to find out about this? So there's various pivot tables that they make up, which we'll come back to. But then let's just go on this one here in terms of analysis. So you can open that up by going into the chart, or you can explore it a little bit more. So if we click on that, then that's taken by each year group. It said how many of them used their Chromebooks. So you can see that that year, first years were using their Chromebooks more often than the senior phase classes. And that would be very difficult to do manually unless you use a pivot table, which we'll come back to in just a moment. So if you want that onto its own spreadsheet, then you just move it to its own sheet. And then you can either copy and paste that, you can copy the chart and copy it into another document or something like that. And you've then got a lot more flexibility over the data that you've got there. So going back to that data again, sorry, let's go. So when we go into Explore, as I say, it gives you all these options here. And you can even ask it questions, and sometimes it's quite surprising how well it will answer your question. I'm not going to try that live because I'll fall flat on my face with this here. But here's the meat of it. This is what it's making, this pivot table where it's got the data from the two different columns sorted by row and then by columns across there like that. So if we click on that Insert Pivot Table, it'll show you the pivot table that it's made. We'll put that on a new spreadsheet. And so it's taking that pivot table. So the rows here is approximately how many periods did you use your Chromebook at some point in the lesson. Then over here in the values, it's saying tick the subjects that you've used Chromebooks with so far. So this is actually giving you data that can go that way and that way. And it's that kind of two-dimensional look at your data, which is where the real power is, instead of just taking everything just by rows. I'm just wondering, Paula or Margaret, do you want to chip in here? Because you know pivot tables, I'm sure, better than I do, and you could probably put it a bit more coherently.
A pivot table is just a way to summarize your data. So if you're wanting that host of information that you had, if you want to summarize it down, then your pivot table is the best way to use it. But it all depends what you want to do with your data.
Yeah. And I think having a clear idea of what you're trying to do is the main thing to start off with. Sometimes the explore function can be give you an idea, but I have been, I'll be honest, hopelessly confused at times as to what I'm actually trying to do with it. So let's just to show you very briefly. Well, hang on, let's just see what we think here. Would you like to do more on pivot tables, or would you prefer to just carry on with some other uses of spreadsheets? Because we've got a quarter of an hour left, and it could get a bit techie with pivot tables. So if you just put in other uses or pivot tables, and that'll determine how we spend the last 10 minutes. Right, it's pretty comprehensive. That's fine. Anyway, it's if you really like analyzing your data, it's a good thing to play with. But that's where you get it. And the easy in is to use those the explore function, definitely. Okay. So there are other ways that we can use. So what we've worked through at the moment is all that stuff with mark sheets, worked through setting surveys with forms. Oops. And just going to show you a few spreadsheets to do with other things in terms of mostly admin, I'll be honest. Milburn's quite upfront about the fact that if you can use G Suite to streamline your admin, then you're spending more time on learning and teaching. So it's still seen as being a useful use of for learning and teaching. In case people say, oh, you're not supposed to use this for admin, well, we kind of do. So I'm just going to show you in terms of, for our department admin, we've got basically, we don't use a department handbook anymore. We've got almost everything on a spreadsheet. So I've got a department timetable. That's instead of the CMIS version of the timetable. I showed you there's something similar last week where we've got all the admin files as links there. In large faculty, it's nice to know who's teaching which classes. So I've got that, and basically just keep going across the tabs here with year schedules, with all the admin that really holds the department together in one place. So people only have to work with one spreadsheet there. Depends on the size of the department, but even for a smaller school, that kind of thing could be useful. The other thing that we have used very briefly, I think you were talking about this, Kirsty, is for engagement with our online at the moment. So this is people who've either been engaging, or the tick means that they haven't been engaging.
Yeah, we've got the tick boxes for who's not been engaging.
Yeah. Just to go back and just go, in terms of budgets, for those of you who have to manage budgets, if you've got different funding coming in, then you can obviously set up different sheets for your different budgets, and then they can all go to a summary by linking between the different tabs of your spreadsheets. So that could be useful either at school or elsewhere. And then in terms of resource management, this is something which nationally we've done to provide a list of resources across physics teachers in Scotland. So we've got each of the courses along the bottom here, and then for each course what we've done is list the SQA content statements, and then as people have got things that they want to suggest, each of these is a link for different resources that is an online either Google Doc or Microsoft Doc. So this has proven very useful at the moment, or it may do if we are on blended learning again in August, but even over the last few weeks, people have found this a very useful way to share resources, where again, you're using a hyperlink. So if I click on one of these and do link, then it's got the text that's being displayed and then the long link there, just as we were doing right at the first week, but this time we're doing it with Google Sheets. The advantage of Google Sheets is you can add things in, you can put in extra rows or extra columns. The copy protection is such that on this side here for suggestions, then this is open to anybody on the internet, so any physics teacher in Scotland can put in the suggestion for a resource. This side over here is protected, so an admin would move from the right-hand side to the left-hand side of the sheet because you can protect certain areas of the different sheets, and that goes all the way up through higher and advanced higher. So if you are wrestling with the idea of how to share resources across a subject area, that's proving to be popular, certainly in sciences. Okay, that's the whistle-stop tour of things to do, all just things to do with spreadsheets. I know time is pressing and our energy levels are pretty rock bottom at the moment, and people might say, well, that's great, but I just don't have the energy to do something for next week. I think it's, you know, if you wanted to maybe work on something over the summer, then you could come back to me or share something on the classroom rather than feel you've got to do it in the next 7 days, because I think most people are pretty whacked at the moment. But hopefully there's things there that you would find useful and you could use either for your admin, for maybe for setting up for next session, or for doing something with the class. So is there anything that you're thinking maybe either previously or just now that you're thinking, oh, I could use a spreadsheet for that?
I was thinking about getting pupils to put into a spreadsheet for themselves what they've done. So for instance, if they're working through a keyboard course in music, they could actually write down what they've done, put their own comments in, and that could then go back to a central spreadsheet for myself. So would that just be a hyperlink from theirs to mine? How would that work?
I think your best bet in that case, Fenella, is to do it as a Google form.
Right, okay.
And then that spreadsheet that they respond to just keeps getting built up. It stays live. It's always linked to the Google form. So they can reply. They just keep using the same Google form to say what they've been doing, and then it just adds more. And then you can sort it by the email address. So if you're collecting email addresses, then you can just filter it by email addresses, and then it'll have it all listed as to.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, that would.
Yes, it's just, you know, just a bit more straightforward and automated. Really, that's the main thing.
Yeah, thanks for that.
You know, hopefully that's given you a little bit of ideas that there's an awful lot you can do with these Google Sheets, and it does some things that Microsoft Excel doesn't. Certainly the Explore function and the fact that you can share different areas so much more straightforwardly than you can do with Excel is important. So you can collaborate across a whole department using it. For instance, that timetable sheet, things like that. And you can also do that, you know, Kirsty in science, there's a lot of possibilities for sharing resources between group, sharing results between groups, things like that. So it's a slow burner, let's say, this one, in terms of thinking, oh, I could use a spreadsheet for that maybe. So next week, the plan is to talk about how we showcase everything in terms of using mostly Google Sites, but other things to allow, you know, that what you would normally have as a display board in your corridor, can we do something similar online so that you can put your department in the best light so that parents and Twitter feeders and things like that can see the sort of things that you've been up to with your online presence. And that would be the focus of next week, how we display learners' work, and also is a website actually a good means of sharing resources as well.